Hey everyone, so today I want to cover some of the mistakes that I see made almost every single year as we prepare for admissions. And as somebody who's been doing consulting, tutoring, SAT, ACT prep, the same pattern tends to emerge. And that's where I have concerns. To be clear, when I say the 7 common moves families make before admissions that backfire, I do not mean one of these moves will single-handedly bring everything to a crashing halt. But I do think it's worth discussing with families what are some moves that may not set them up in the way that they think it's going to set them up. So let's get into it. So a little bit about me, I've been doing this for over 10 years, and my students attend these institutions. So here's 1, 2, and 3. Okay. We have some more being added, but we haven't finalized this year. I would say, once again, it's been a very crazy, wild year for college admissions. All right. Okay. And I've also been seeing this is the press that I've done. So let's just keep it moving. Okay. So the first big thing that I see, and I actually saw this on a TikTok video the other day, is people picking a dream school. For me, there is no value in picking a dream school. There's a value in picking a dream and saying, like, this is what I hope to do with my life. But allowing yourself or your child to focus their energy on the institution, and then that's going to be the driver and that's going to be the vehicle that's going to get them there, rather than the student being the vehicle, allows them to feel like if they don't get in or they can't afford to go or something happens, then all of a sudden, the dream can't happen. So for me, I tend to find that dream schools are a way in some searches to drive up the debt. And so what I mean by that is we see a lot of times students will turn down, full ride offers because they have set in their mind, this is my dream school. I cannot accomplish my dreams unless I go to this school. So we're going to talk about things that you can do differently. For me, I tend to create a dream cluster as opposed to a dream school instead of one institution. So let's say a student comes to me and they're looking at a highly rejected like Brown University, and they're looking at an open curriculum, right? And that's what they love about Brown. Okay, that's cool. Let's find more schools with open curriculums because you can be successful anywhere. One of the things that I tell my students all the time is you will grow wherever I plant you. So let's find that characteristic. Maybe there's something else about Brown, and let's start constructing a list around that. I typically, use my friends who are admissions officers. I'll also use ChatGPT to kind of come up with do some Google searches, talk to the counselors and things like that. But we create a cluster of schools that share the same characteristics. And then I tell the student, it's your job to construct your dream, right? The institution may fall short. The institution may not align with you. They may not accept you. You might get there and it's wow, it's not at all what they advertise in the brochure. So it's your job to focus on you. So if these are the things that attract you to this particular college, then let's go ahead and have that discussion, and let's figure out other colleges that share these traits that are so attractive to you. So not a dream school. In the same vein, we have college lists that are built around reach, target, and safety schools. Do not like this, hate it. I will tell students not to do this. I will tell parents not to let students do this, and caretakers not to let their students do it. But every single year, you'll have people that decide to do it, even if it's not with me. So the reason I have a problem with reach, target, and safety is now you're starting to tier schools. And so when a student gets an offer from, let's say, a safety school, right, and it's a great offer and they should be considering it, again, they're like, well, my reach school is offering this or my target school is offering this. It also makes them feel like they're not going to be secure. And I don't really see the purpose of that. So yes, we can start thinking in terms of, how much, students are accepted. And so we want to have some options where a lot more students are accepted. We don't want to just have a list of 10%, like less than 10% of students are accepted. We don't want that. We don't want just rejective colleges or selective colleges, whatever you like to call them. But we also want to make sure that we're not sending the signal like, hey, if you go to this school, it's not as good as the other school, because there's no real purpose behind that besides to drive up debt, right? One thing that I also like to do is I like to, before we start, and I know a lot of parents and a lot of students do not want to talk budget when they start. They're like, we're going to get scholarships. We're going to focus on scholarships. She's going to be applying to all the scholarships. One, scholarships don't always close a gap. I can tell you that as somebody who has helped students apply for hundreds. And then two, you have to worry about scholarship displacement, where essentially the school steals your scholarship, reduces your financial aid so that they can capture your scholarship. And you can go ahead and Google scholarship displacement, but that's what we are looking at. And so for me, one of the things that we do is we go through the list and we say, in this cluster of schools, because we no longer refer to them as like reach, target, safety, which ones have a better return on investment. We tend to use collegescorecard.gov to figure out the average salary. I'm not sure if it's still going to be up by the time you all see this video, but hopefully it is. You can also just look at average salaries. The one thing I would tell parents to also consider is if your student is going to like a specialized program like architecture, or they're going into engineering or a particular theater program or anything like that, make sure that the school that you pick, you're comfortable with the price tag, even if they decide to drop the major. There's nothing worse than a student who feels like they cannot switch majors, or like, this is not the right thing for me because, well, my parents are paying so much for this. Or they do decide to drop a major and then the parent has an issue because it's like, I wouldn't have paid, $30,000 for you to go to this school if you were going to go into a humanities major, like a sociology major. I'm sociology, so a sociology major. So you have to make sure that your budget reflects, okay, this is the major that we are interested in, and this is the school that we're interested in. And if they drop that major, we would still think that this is a big deal for us. So what I do is I figure out the return on investment in terms of how much salary is coming in. And then are there particular programs that justify an increased cost? So like the programs I tend to look at include programs like, I like to look at, are they paying for study abroad? Like, is your financial aid going to go with you on study abroad? Do they pay for unpaid internships? Are they doing other things like that? So like, those are the things that for me are going to be helpful. Hold on one second. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. Recording issue. But I want to look at, are there, so for example, ways that I've been able to justify paying more. A student is going to become an RA and most of their costs is housing, or in the second year, because they can't usually do that in the first year. Or there's a particular externship program. So in some schools, there's an externship program. We talk to the other students. They're like, yeah, I tend to make about $10,000 to $15,000. Yes, we're willing to absorb the cost of first year if that means in year 2, 3, and 4, they're able to get this externship, or they pay for unpaid internships. Like, those are benefits that I can tangibly look at and say, this is going to add value, and therefore, it's worth more. The other thing I tend to consider is travel costs, especially in hurricane and tornado zones. I don't think a lot of people think about this, but like, is a school's policy that they have to be removed from campus if there's a hurricane or a tornado or some kind of weather event, and are we have to pay for that? So I tend to add about 5,000 in my head to that budget for every option that's not about 2 to 3 hours away. As somebody who can drive 10 hours in a day, 14 hours in a day, and be completely fine, my stretch time would be a little bit longer. But like, are we going to have to buy them a car? Are we going to have to transport them? Are we going to have the train? How are we going to get everything there? How are we going to get them back? If there's an emergency, how are we going to get them back? I add that in and I say, for each school, okay, this school is only worth it if it's this number. Before scholarships, before external scholarships, they have to value you enough to bring your tuition down to this particular number. So have that in mind before you start, and then you can still do your scholarship plan, and maybe they get displaced in August or stolen, or maybe they don't. Who knows? Okay. Next one. We are still having a little bit of issue, but I think we got it now. Okay. You spend your summer focused on the SAT and ACT scores and college essays. This, out of everything, I will die on this hill. And I have SAT scores are really, really important. Are they though? Okay. So what I tell everybody is like, college admissions is kind of presented as this monolithic thing, like this one being where it's like essays are always important, or SAT scores are always important, or you need to get a 1450, or you have to have more than a 1450. You have to have 1500. Nope, you have to have more than 1500. You need 1550. You need to talk to every school on your list. Okay. So here's some things that for me, I am looking at. Like, for example, there's a popular public school that a lot of students from out of state are interested in attending. And we had students testing and retesting and testing and retesting over and over again to get like a higher score. And so I talked to the dean of that particular admissions office and I said, they're testing and retesting. Do you think that's a wise strategy for your particular school? And the dean said, no, because we don't really use that in our process. I hope they're not retesting for us. Yes, we are test required, but we're not tests like is a critical thing of our process. So as long as you're in range, we're fine, right? But there have been other schools where I talk to them, I say, oh, okay, should they apply test optional? Should they apply with test scores? Should they retest? And they say, yeah, they need to get, a 14 or a 1250 so that they can access these particular benefits. The schools that care about the SAT and ACT tend to present themselves. The one thing I do hear a lot is like test optional is not really optional. Everybody who's wanted to go back to test required has had the opportunity to go back. That's all I'm going to say. So everybody who was kind of forced into it during the pandemic, everybody's now made a decision. Does this work for us or does this not work for us? And the individuals who have said test optional, they are not saying, okay, this is the equation. We remove the test, you add something else. They are saying it does not really hold a lot of weight or value in our system. And one of my particular friends who was moving from a test optional to a test free system, they were looking at this and they said, when we were doing the training, we went through and we all did a file, like on one side of the room, it was a file, the same file for all of us, but we made a decision based on each particular student. Some of us had the scores, some of us didn't have the scores. We all came to the same conclusion, accept or reject or waitlist or whatever, based on our rubric, because the SAT doesn't mean that much to that particular school. So you need to check, especially if you have a student who is, like I see a lot of students who are at like a 30 for the ACT and they're retesting, or they're at a 1500 and they're retesting. And it's like, because I want a 1550, I want a 34. Does that actually matter in the process? As somebody who has worked with and helped cultivate applications for perfect scores, I can tell you that my test optional students sometimes beat them out in terms of the number of acceptances because they spent so much time doing that as opposed to the other things that really matter. So you want to check with each college on your list to make sure that each college on your list actually cares about the SAT and the ACT, and how they're going to use it. Because if they're using it in a big way, then it makes sense to invest time here. The only thing that I will say that I feel like is universal is make sure you know where the colleges on your list are spending their time during their review. Like, what do they actually care about? Because knowing general admission stuff and knowing what these institutions care about are going to be two different things. The same goes for college essays. So when we look at college essays, I see students, it's June right now, June of 2025. I see students talking about, like, I'm going to spend the entire summer working on my essay. I'm going to go through it, like my Common App essay. I'll also see students who say, this is the essay that got me in. There are schools that do not look at the Common App essay, and students do not know that. Okay, there are some that heavily rely on it. There are others that care very little about it. Some just care about their supplementals. Going through, and like a lot of times students will get this information from the common data set. They'll say, well, the common data set says it's actually very important. Which essay? Is it the Common App essay that's very important? Or is it the supplemental essays that are very important? So for me, I have some colleges on my radar that I know my students tend to apply to a lot, that on the common data set, it does say, hey, very important in terms of the essay, but what they mean is supplemental essays are not even reading the actual Common App essay. And for some of them, they mean the Common App essay. So you need to figure out for your particular student and their particular journey, what is going on. A lot of times students will ask me, like, how do I bring this up? Or like, can I search online? You don't need to search online. And in fact, online is probably the worst place to get information about admissions. It's just full of misinformation, right? You do not need to search online. But what you do need to do is you need to look at your, talk to your admissions officers, have a conversation. If you can get to the regional admissions officer for your particular region or your particular school, if you have a counselor that can connect you, even better. Confirm this information before you spend all of your time this summer on a college essay or like a passion project or starting a nonprofit or all the things that have been coming up. Spend a lot of your time there and ask them the questions. And then if you're not sure, talk to another admissions officer, but verify the information. Like in DC, the DC area, we have this very military phrase, which is like trust but verify. Trust but verify. So you're not spending your summer writing an essay that people aren't going to necessarily read. The other thing is very important, doesn't mean I'm going line by line. So if I'm going through the essay, it doesn't mean like if I mark on the common data set, which is like a collection of data about admissions, it's also about enrollment and everything else to do with the college, but one section is devoted to admissions. If I'm looking at the common data set, it says very important. It does not mean that that person's going to read this essay and go line by line and be like, oh, I need it. So a lot of times I see students focusing on the middle part. They're like, I really need this transition to work. And I'm like, there's no way the admissions officer is going to be focusing on these particular lines. I tend to focus on the first 1-2 paragraphs, a little bit in the middle, like anything that pops off the page, I visually scan it, and then a couple at the bottom, but I want to get to the point as quickly as possible in my college essays. So people will emphasize like, this is a good hook, or this is a good hook. Like you see all these videos on TikTok about like, this is a great hook for your essay. I would rather you get to the point. Imagine in your mind, your admissions officer is tired, cranky, and has one more file before they can go home. Now let's scan. And also know that it's going to be scanned maybe multiple times. Like they might go over it in committee. They might want to highlight particular lines. They might, but it doesn't mean do not put any effort into the essay. It just means put effort into the essays that particularly matter. Where the school's spending their time is where you should be spending your time, if that makes sense. All right, let's see. Is it changing? We're going to find out together, guys. Apparently not. Okay. Plan to apply now and figure out how to pay later. Okay. I'm going to make this as clear as possible. You need to have a budget with your students. What the other, maybe like 2-3 weeks ago, we went to buy a car before the tariffs, and people were, I was sitting down with the person who does the finances, because I'm the one in my family that negotiates any car. And we went back and forth on the price multiple times, as one does in a car dealership. And then the individual who was doing the financing said, oh, yeah, I have a son going to college. I said, what college? Told me the college. I said, oh, that's pretty expensive college. Did you get a good deal? And the parent was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so. And I asked, would you let your kid buy a car on their own? No. Would you let your kid go into the grocery store and be like, like this kid loves to pull things off the shelf, but I'm not going to tell them that he only has $5 until then? No. What happens in admissions, and the one thing I will say very fervently, like I hate when admissions teams or admissions officers or enrollment officers or enrollment deans or whatever, I utterly cannot stand when I hear, well, students need to know their budget, because I know what happens at the admissions sessions. Somebody raises their hand and say, hey, I'm really concerned. This is really out of my budget. And they say scholarships are coming. And so then it's like, oh, okay. It's my job now as this one individual to spend hours and hours of my time writing essay after essay. As somebody who does scholarships, I will say out of 100, you could get 0, you could get 1, you could get 5. The scholarships tend to go around 1 or 2 particular students in that particular school. They're like applying for everything, and they tend to get everything. And then the other students who are a little bit lower don't get as much. So they tend to go to the superstars. And that's why you see these big media, $5 million in scholarships or something absurd, whatever. But the easiest source for money, and the money that's the most protected in the college admissions process, is going to be any merit aid that is given to you by the school. Institutional aid is king, right? Institutional aid does not tend to be displaced. What tends to be displaced is I get an external scholarship for $10,000. Then the school finds out, and in August they say, oh, well, you don't need $10,000 from us because you got it from somewhere else. Does that make sense? No. But does that happen? Yes. Can you fight it? Yes. But even if you're in a state, and I know that there are certain states that have passed laws where scholarship displacement is now illegal, I still have students call me from those particular schools in those particular states. And yes, we're able to get their money back, but there are a couple week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks of stress while we're figuring out how to pay in the meantime so that they can still go to class. Okay. So for me, one of the things that we need to do is say, this is our budget. We are not paying more than this. You do not want to be in the situation. And I know every parent will say to you, like themselves, oh, this is not going to be me. This is not going to be me. Even the smartest parents tend to fall into this trap. They will say, I'm going to stay within my budget. But then there's students like, I've worked so hard. I've gotten into my dream school, like, how can you tell me we can't go? And they're like, it's only $10,000 more. And you're like, yeah, that's a lot of money, like $40,000 over the next 4 years. That doesn't even include any tuition increases. Like that includes nothing, right? So we have all of that, and we start to think about that. And the student's like, well, we're taking out debt anyway. And in your mind, we're taking out debt anyway. Year 1, it feels comfortable. Year 2, it starts to feel uncomfortable. By year 3, some people have to pull their kids. Some people, like, there's always like, oh, we'll get scholarships later. Like after year 1, there's all these scholarships available. Your student should be able to like live in peace and focus on their education. Okay. So you do not want to not have a, like, this is the bottom line cost. Do not come back to me if it's not, because parents will say, I'm completely fine. My student's not going to influence me. But when you see your kid crying and you're like, I'm already taking out debt, it's very easy to fall into that trap. So do not figure out how to pay for it later. You can Google, like, there are financial aid calculators and things like that, but you can Google, like, okay, I have this particular income. This is the schools. These are all the schools on the list. Put it into Google, put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, based on that, what are these schools going to cost, right? And then tell your student, okay, these are the schools that we anticipate are going to be over budget. These are the schools that we anticipate are going to be under budget. That way they don't have their heart set on a school that maybe they're not going to be able to afford to go to. And you're like, I hope that you're able to get merit aid. But external scholarships, we cannot necessarily rely on them unless, like, they're protected. And I will look for scholarships that are actually talking about how they protect from displacement. But as somebody who has worked with scholarship providers, I know that a lot of them know that the scholarships are not going into the hands of students, but they don't know how to solve that problem. So make sure that your student is aware of which options are more expensive, what price it needs to come down to, what you're willing to pay more for, and then have that conversation up front so that you're not having it on the back end. My parents did this with me, and I feel like there was a lot of breadcrumbs in my past that indicated that I was, in fact, going to be a college admissions consultant or in the college admissions space, because my parents told me, if UCLA does not come down to this price, you are not going. So luckily I was rejected. But I knew, and so I knew not to even bother them. It's just like if I am in the grocery store with my parents when I was younger, and they're like, you only have $3 because it was the 90s, right? You only have $3. So don't ask me for anything more than 3. I'm not asking them for anything more than 3. I know my parameters. And then your student is more aware and they don't feel blindsided by at the end. And you don't feel emotionally blindsided when they feel like you've betrayed them. Okay. Let's see. All right, next one. All right. Okay, hold on. We're having another issue. Okay, so we're on the next one. We've been having some recording issues, but I think we resolved them. So we talked about this a little bit in the last one. You focus on scholarships instead of total cost and debt. Remember, every scholarship that you bring from the outside, I would say the only ones where it's truly protected are the ones where they're covering expenses and the check is going directly to the student. Or we have scholarships and a bunch of other things for students who are going into like a particular program, like a Merrill Lynch or a Lockheed Martin, like one of those company pipeline programs. Those tend to be safeguarded and protected because they're PR things, but just make sure that the scholarship is going to be honored. Talk to other students. You know, like one of the things that I love to do, I don't like to do college tours because they're just propaganda machines. But I do like to go into the financial aid office. So I'll go in on like a random Wednesday and see what people are yelling about. Like I'll stay for maybe 2 hours and just hear the conversations that are being had and like what are the students coming in that are upset. And I'll talk to students and kind of get a sense of like what are the financial aid problems. I'll go on different forums and things like that and kind of see where that is. So you want to focus on the total cost and debt. And it's not just tuition, it's tuition and fees and room and board and all of these other things. Like, do I have to have their insurance? Can I use my insurance? Things like that, mental health costs. There's a really good book on this that I feel like is a lot more comprehensive than others. So it's The Price You Pay by Ron Lieber. And he does a lot of articles in the New York Times. So I would read that because it goes over like, have you considered like, does your child need therapy? Do they need their medication? Are they going to need particular services? My friend Elizabeth has a great book on, you know, making sure that the cost is low, but also the access remains the same or is real, like you're realistically prepared for students with disabilities. So you want to make sure that you have all of that set up before you start, and you're taking that into account. And as we already talked about before, expenses for travel, are they coming back 2 to 3 times a year? Like, one of the things that my East Coast parents have to talk about before they go send their kids to the West Coast is, like, are they coming back for Thanksgiving? What's the price if they stay on campus? Is there food provided? Because not every campus has food over the holiday breaks. Are they doing like a J term or something like that? Do they need to come back more than twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year? What about an emergency cost? So you want to build that in before you start. Let's see. Okay. This is probably one of my top ones. Basing your list, your college list, on the rankings, bad idea. Like, I see a lot of students that, like, it has to be top 20, has to be top 30, has to be top 50. I want an Ivy. I want a new Ivy, like the Forbes list, the new Ivy. I want this, I want that. I tend to think we're moving towards a cycle of admissions where a lot of students seem to believe and are being indoctrinated to believe, like, it's not just coming out of nowhere, that your school should be a 5-star resort. Like, oh, they don't have really good dorms. Like, oh, like, I just didn't like the campus. Like, it just wasn't as bright as the other campus. And it's like, right, that's super great and something that we should consider, but maybe it's not something that we should be paying $10,000 more for. Same thing goes with the rankings. And I will say one thing, even though I've studied the rankings multiple times, in my head, I was like, there has to be like a little percent that's job placement and, like, reputation among employers. I was like, has to be. No. For the U.S. News and World Report and for a lot of the rankings, I think I found maybe 2, and I'll have to, like, put it in the comments or something. But I found 2 where they don't do job placement. A majority of that score is like a reputation among your peers. So it's, this college president says that this college is good, or this provost says this college is good, or this provost or this admissions dean said this college is good. Has nothing to do with how many students are placed in their jobs. For me, I like to know that. And so a lot of times people will say, like, the higher the ranking, the more networking opportunities, the more opportunities that we have. And it's not unusual for when a student gets in, if we ask, like, can you pitch a case why this particular institution, that they say, well, it's because it's this Ivy League school. So, like, let's pull it out of the air. Cornell. It's Cornell. Okay. And that sounds great on paper, but if a majority of your students are coming from 1% or 5% backgrounds, and we know that they're not going to be, like, opening their door to networking opportunities, and a majority of the students are getting their job because, like, their dad plays with the other person's dad, or their mom plays with the other person's mom, or their caretaker plays with the other caretaker, like a game of squash or whatever, that's not going to really be helpful. If the opportunities for networking are kind of closed and not open, you're looking for schools with open networks. It's not just good networks, it's open networks. I don't want a school where my students can be treated as a token. And I don't want a school where my student is seeing other people having all these great opportunities, but I'm not able to access them because everybody's known each other since they were summering in, the Hamptons, right? They have the same ski schedule or whatever. They're going to the same places for vacation. Like, there's a familiarity, even if they don't know each other, about a culture. And there's a culture to exclude people who are not born into that, or only accept those who they don't perceive as a threat. So what I'm looking for is open networking. I want to talk to somebody in my particular financial situation. So I need a mirror a lot of the times, I need a mirror for Black students, but I also need a mirror in particular for income levels. Like, I'm not going to ask as a student from a very wealthy background, was it easy for you to get a job? I'm going to ask somebody who's from my background, from my neighborhood, like, especially if they're from your high school or your neighborhood, or like they have some shared ties with you. Like, how easy was it to navigate? How open is career services? Are they just giving you a piece of paper and being like, okay, good luck? Or are they making calls for you? Like, and yeah, there is something to a student putting themselves out there and growing and developing networking skills as they go. But which schools are cultivating that, and which schools are allowing us to have connections with professors who might have job opportunities or know somebody who has job opportunities? We want an open network. So highly ranked doesn't mean open network. I would say when I look through the top 30, there are schools that I just don't send students who don't already have a good grasp of networking to, because I know that they're going to feel isolated and alone. And a great book on this is actually by Tony Jack and is called The Privileged War. I think that is a very insightful read because it talks about how you're going to institutions, but you're not actually accessing them. Like, a lot of times, one of the things that we consider in our final decision for admissions is we consider, like, are you going to be working? Like, this is a great school, but if you're always working, like, it can be really bad. So I've had students working in laundry, working in food services, and it can be awkward to be serving the friend that you're trying to impress, right? And if one school, like, the cost forces you to work, in another school, they're covering some costs so that you don't have to work as much or you don't have to work as frequently. And I would say the more humiliating jobs like cleaning other people's dorms or folding their laundry or picking up their laundry tend to be the best paying jobs, unfortunately. You're going to be in a situation where you're like, am I here? It gives like a very Downton Abbey, upstairs, downstairs kind of vibe. So make sure that your student is not just looking at ranking, like, make sure the opportunities are actually accessible to them. Okay? Same thing here. You focus on prestige over ROI. Return on investment needs to start, like, that conversation needs to start a lot earlier, if I'm being honest. Significantly earlier. Move that conversation up. Move it up earlier. Make sure that your student knows, like, this is not just about, like, I like their basketball team. And kids are not shallow. I'm not trying to present it like that, but it's not just about basketball teams and a great college tour and, like, it's so pretty here and I want to join this sorority. It's also about, if I put this money into your education, how are we going to see it come back, and when are we going to see it come back? The one thing I tell parents now, which is unfortunate, is prepare for a 10-year plan. Am I going to need to support them through grad school? Am I going to need to support them through law school, med school? Am I going to have to help them when they're studying for the bar? Are they going to be like, I don't want a situation where I paid all this money and nobody wants their kid to come back and live with them, right? Like, nobody wants that. They want their kid to have an independent life. But you also want a situation where if they do come back, you're not like constantly throwing it in their face, like, hey, I paid all this money for this, or you feel disappointed because it's like, what do we pay all this money for if you're going to end up getting some random job? Like, give them enough space to be flexible. I think one of the things that was beneficial, and this is not accessible now, is when I went to college, Virginia Tech's tuition was like $3,000. And I went to the presentation because I wanted to skip English. And I remember talking to, like, my friend in the audience, and then we saw $3,000. And I was like, wait, hold up, go back. Because I had been making that at IHOP over the summer. Like, I made like maybe $1,700-$1,800. So I knew within a year, as long as I kept working, I could make about $3,000. So I knew it was a price that I could afford. And even though my parents were going to pay for my education, I knew that something failed, which in 2008, my parents were fine. But in 2008, when the market crashed, or like 2006, like, it was bad, right? So I had that. And then my parents were able to help me with studying for the bar when I became a lawyer, or I had more money than other people had to play with when it came to law school. So I could consider more expensive options. And that was a huge return on investment because we had employers coming to the school as opposed to us having to go to job fairs. So I would say, think about, okay, for the next 10 years, what support do we want to provide our student? Like, do we want to help them buy their first house or pay for their wedding or, buy their car, or help them if they need to study for the bar and they need to take time off of work? Do we want to do that? Because a lot of these like med school, also like residency programs, studying for the bar, there's an assumption of wealth behind it. And that assumption can exclude a lot of people. So like, it's really hard as somebody who did work at certain parts of taking the bar, it's really hard to study for the bar while you're working. And if you don't have a job that allows you to take off, because some jobs do, you do want to think about that cost and like what type of support you want to provide, and how much your money can stretch. And then if they are unable to find a job for a while, what is a price where you won't have resentment or have despair? Okay. All right. I think that's actually it. I'm surprised. I forgot that there was only 7. But you can subscribe to Stay in the Loop. Right now, we are doing Summer Start with our students. So Summer Start is just a program where we sit down with our students and we kind of go over the things that they need to do to get ready for the admission season. So that, I know this is a completely random thing, but a lot of parents don't anticipate that their student's going to turn to them in their senior year and say, I'm going to do this on my own. You're not going to tell me what to do. And that can be really scary. And like that causes a lot of fights. I would say the most fights in high school tend to happen the senior year. So be prepared, buckle up. But I will say, they get closed out of the process and then they're like, is she doing everything right? Like, has she submitted things? And the students kind of just giving them a blank every time they go to them, or it starts a fight every single time and they're not getting the information. So I tend to sit down with the students in advance, come up with a plan, and then come up with check-in points and be like, hey, they're paying for the application. And I have some students that will say, well, I'll pay for the application. No, pay for prom, pay for everything else. Like, you're going to have so many events senior year that you're going to want to participate in. Don't waste your money on applications, right? So if your parents can cover it or you can get a fee waiver, that would be great. But if not, like if they're covering it or you're covering it, you should still keep them in the loop. If they're the person that's going to be responsible for you, keep them in the loop. And so this is a plan and this is how we sit down. So we have our Summer Start. We're not sure if we're going to be doing anything else after that. But kind of stay tuned, get on the list. We always make the offers to the list first. All right. And hopefully that is enough information for you all to prepare for college admissions and kind of rethink some things so that you're not in a bad situation later, because student debt doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't. There are steps that get you closer and closer to the cliff, and they don't ever feel like dangerous steps until you take all of them. And then you realize, wait a second, the only option we have is like pay for all of these expensive colleges or send them to a community college, even though they worked hard. And I love our community college, Northern Virginia Community College, but it shouldn't be a backup. It should be, I'm excited to go, right? So keep that in mind. Keep that in your head as you start preparing your student for admissions. Okay? Bye, everyone.